All right, it's time to talk basketball. I'm Jose Salviati, editor at thepeachbasket.net. He's Steve Prisciello, longtime educator, vice principal, high school coach, and athletic director. And this is the 13 Rules Random NBA Thoughts Overtime podcast. We know it's the off season, but there's always things to talk about. And this show specifically is the one where we talk about NBA stars from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, specifically guys you've probably heard of, guys you are no doubt familiar with, but maybe never got a chance to see play. And what's exciting about this show, at least for me, is we get to talk to Steve, who oftentimes got to see these players play. And there's a difference, I think, between what we hear about the player, what we've come to know about this player, and actually watching them play. And that's what's been most eye-opening for me personally, as we've discussed some of the greats, Sam Jones, Will Chamberlain, Rick Barry, Pistol Pete Maravich. We'll share a little bit about who we're talking about today in just a minute, but we want to know what made these players special, right? What player today most resembles that particular player's special skill, and what Steve's greatest memory about that particular player is. Today, we'll discuss the player who is often left off the GOAT conversation. You agree or disagree with that? He usually doesn't come up in the conversation, which is dominated by Michael Jordan, LeBron, Kareem, Wilt, Kobe, others. But he's generally known as the greatest winner in NBA history. He's a Hall of Famer, 5-time MVP, 12-time All-Star, 4-time NBA rebounding champion, and incredibly, an 11-time NBA champion. Most rings ever. His number 6 was retired by all NBA teams in 2022. He is Bill Russell. All right, Steve, are you ready to talk about the greatest, arguably one of the greatest centers to play the game? All right, so let's start with that. This is, I was sharing with you just before we started, this is the kind of the quintessential player for me, because I never got to see him play, but I feel like I know him. He was always at the Hall of Fame, induction ceremonies. When he was alive, he was giving away trophies for the NBA. He was a great ambassador for the NBA. So I knew him, but I never got to watch him play. I just heard stories. So let me start with the big general question. What made Bill Russell so special?
He won everywhere he went.
Boom.
I mean, you go through his life. In college, 2 years in a row, they won the NCAA title. He was the most valuable player in the tournament. Then he went to the Olympics, captain of the team. They won there in 56. Then he went to the Celtics in 11 out of 13 years. And you could talk about that for a while, but the thing you'll say, the second year they didn't win it, his second year in the league, he had a bad ankle, and he played Game 7, but he was hurting against Bob Pettit and the Hawks. And then the only real loss was to Philadelphia, and Philadelphia had a great team in 66-67 season with Wilt. That was the only real loss. The rest of the time, those other 11 years, they won it. What was remarkable, and the last 2 years he won it as a coach, but there was a lot more to Russell. First of all, he was born in Louisiana, and his mother passed. His father moved the family to Oakland. His father worked as a trucker, driving, but he grew up there. And like a lot of great players, he wasn't real good as a kid. He was gangly and had a little problem. And then as time went on, things came together, and the USF, University of San Francisco, is the school that recruited him, when a lot of other schools passed on him or didn't even know about him. He had his teammate at USF was a guy by the name of Casey Jones, who ended up playing with him for many years with the Celtics and had a pretty good career also, Hall of Fame career. But he came from that, Olympics, then to the Celtics, and then continuously won. They won 8 straight titles after that second year, making it 9. And then Red Auerbach retires, and he makes Russell the coach. And the first year of Russell as the coach, they don't win. In fact, Game 5 against Philly. They lost in 5 to Philly that year. The people were in Philly were yelling more or less the dynasty is over and all that stuff. And they, and they Philly scored 140 points that game, and they really blew the Celtics out. Russell, being the class act he was, after the game, went into the locker room and shook Wilt's hand and all, and said how great he was. But then Russell became, in the next 2 years as the coach, they won titles, and the first one was amazing because they were losing 3-1 against Philly in the playoffs again, and they won the last 3. And in the last game, Wilt only took 2 shots in the second half, and Boston beat him 100-96, where Russell made a couple key plays down the stretch to win it for Boston. Now, as a kid, I was not able to see that on TV like everything is on TV today. I listened to that, my little transistor radio, and I listened, and how the announcers were amazed that Wilt only took 2 shots in the game. Boston then went into the finals, beat the Lakers like they always did. They beat them in 6. And then the next year, Russell's last year in the NBA, Boston was a broken down team. They finished the season 48-34, beat up, really worn down. Russell was out for little stretches, had some great games when he did play, still averaged 19 rebounds a game, which I'll get to about rebounding, but they were in trouble. They go into the playoffs. They beat Philadelphia in the first one, I believe, in 5. And then the Knicks, the upstart Knicks with Frazier and Reed and DeBusschere, they beat them in 6. Again, Boston, 48 wins, goes to the finals against the Lakers. Now, the Lakers had 3 superstars, Baylor, West, and Chamberlain, who was traded by Philly after they lost the year before when he wanted out. So now the Lakers were super. The Lakers got off, won the first 2. Boston came back, won the last 2, the next 2, and we talked about Sam Jones making that shot to win game 4. Game 5, Lakers win, back to Boston. It was on, I believe it was on the game of the week. It was on Saturday afternoon on the Wide World of Sports, I believe. But that's when Sam Jones got an ovation because he was retiring, and everybody knew that would be his last home game. Boston wins that game. They go back to Philly. That's the famous game where in the fourth quarter, Boston was winning big. Jerry West led them back. Wilt, with about 5 minutes left, said he hurt his knee, came out. Mel Counts came in and played. Wilt then said he could come back in. The Lakers were coming back again with Jerry West. And it was a close game. And then Don Nelson made, almost at the 24-second buzzer, made an incredible shot from right around the foul line. It hit the back rim, went straight up, and came straight down and went in. Boston held on to win in the Forum, which Jack Ken Cook had a bunch of balloons ready for the celebration. The last piece to that, one of my favorite parts, was Red Auerbach with a cigar after the game being interviewed, looking up at the sky, blowing smoke, saying, what are they going to do with those balloons? Laughing about the Lakers. That was the last. The next thing we knew, in August, Bill Russell retired. I believe he sold a piece, I believe in, I don't know, a sport magazine or something about his retirement. He was done. He had nothing else. And probably the right time because the team and he were on their last legs. That championship in '69 had a guy by the name of M. Bryant playing the point, who really was a journeyman. Bailey Howell, who was a Hall of Famer, but near the end of his career, and John Havlicek, who was great and just coming into his own. In fact, Russell called him the greatest player he ever saw. Wow. But that was basically, and Sam Jones, who was at the end of his career. So here they are with this beat up team, 48 wins, beating the vaunted Lakers with all that, those 3 superstars, which was an incredible upset and a great way to end a tremendous career.
Now, I know this is a talk about or a discussion around Bill Russell, and I don't want to deviate from that at all, but I am in Los Angeles, and I do have to, I got to put on my Lakers hat for just a second, all right, for just a second. I watched that game after you and I have talked about it before. So I watched the fourth quarter. And first off, I was having never really watched a game as a fan, for a game from the 1960s as a fan, it was eye opening to me how good the ball was. Right? Definitely different, but these were the whole plumbers and thing that JJ Redick said just it goes out the door if you watch a game. I mean, this was a talented basketball team. Celtics were up big going into the final quarter. And then Jerry West did amazing Jerry West things in the fourth. And if there was a 3-point line, Lakers would have won that game. Number one, I think. Number two, you said Don Nelson made an incredible shot. Was it incredible or was it lucky?
What's the difference? The winners would say incredible. The losers would say lucky.
All right. That's fair. All right, that's fair. I wasn't sure what kind of response I would get, but as usual, I got a very timely, quick, and appropriate response. That's fair. All right, I got to ask you this. You rattle off some incredible numbers, 8 wins in a row, 11 rings, and him being a player coach. Real question, do you think we'll ever see any of those three again?
No, never see a player coach. Back then, Russell was by himself. There was no assistant. Now, if you look at the NBA bench, it goes 2 rows back. You'll never see that. It's a thing of the past. Basketball now is way more broken down defensively and offensively. There's more things going on where Russell really relied on his teammates in a large amount of ways during timeouts and all. He did things that they suggested, especially the veterans that were with him for many years. That doesn't go on today. Now there's tendencies, everything's broken down. Film is broken down to an extent that, every team knows the plays another team will use in the last second. I mean, the coaching is way beyond what it was then. So I don't see how a player coach could possibly do both today.
Yeah. No, agreed. The next thing that, as you were talking came to mind, and as a fan, I'm really curious, right? We hear a lot about Wilt versus Bill Russell, and Bill Russell talked about it. Wilt talked about it. I think everybody, who's a fan of the game talked about it. So I got to ask you, you've seen these guys literally play against each other, which is pretty cool. Did one dominate the other? Was it 50-50? What kind of rivalry was it really?
Wilt dominated everybody. But Russell somehow always figured out how to win the game. Wow. And I know a lot of people would say Boston had better teams. They did for many years, not the last 2 years. And they still beat them. We can get into Wilt and the mind of Wilt. I don't think Wilt was concerned about winning. It might be the best way to put it, where Russell was consumed by winning. And I was looking something before. It was very interesting. Russell averaged, not averaged, but in 10 times he averaged over 20 rebounds a game. Wilt did it a bunch of times as well. Think about that for a while. Nobody has averaged for in a season over 20 rebounds a game since Wilt did it in '69.
Yeah.
So it tells you how dominant these two were. Russell just had a knack for doing the right thing at the right time, coming up big defensively, making the big block, keeping the ball on the court. And that's been talked about a lot. And that's a very important thing because now a lot of guys will block it, but very dramatically, and it'll go into the stands. Yeah. Russell kept it on the court. His team would get a break going and score. Russell was not a good shooter at all. Had a lefty hook coming across the lane, but it wasn't great. Average foul shooter at best. Scored a lot of points as a trailer on the break. Did things along that line that made him, competitive offensively, but wasn't the guy they went to score. They never did. They had Sam Jones, they had Havlicek, they had a bunch of people beside him that can score. So he did all the things that had to be done. Don Nelson said an interesting thing about him a while back. Some stars show it's about themselves and make themselves better. Russell was a star, but he made everybody else better. And that's
Yeah.
an interesting way to look at it and think about it. Because again, now, and if you think about this, Don Nelson in his professional career was average, but because he played with that team, his number's been retired too. So it tells you, you know, how Russell can make someone better
Yeah.
on those teams. By the way, he 5-time MVP. I mean, think about these things that he did. They're just, just incredible. And then we didn't get to his post basketball life, which we could talk about in a second.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, let's hold off on that for a minute, because I'm looking at the numbers right now. You're right? 10 times over 20 rebounds. There were 3 times in his career, 3 seasons in his career where he didn't average 20. And in those seasons, he averaged 19.6, 19.3, and 18.6. I mean, so it's unbelievable. In his career, he averaged 22.5 rebounds per game, which is staggering. Just absolutely staggering.
In today's NBA, that's unheard of. If somebody gets 20 rebounds in a game now, they want to throw a parade for him. It's a whole different game, and the whole thing. I was looking at something. Dennis Rodman, I think, had 18 one year. He averaged 18. So that was, I guess the best in the modern era.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember we did exactly that, right? When Dennis Rodman, had those 18 boards, you throw out a red carpet. I mean, it's staggering. And this was just a Tuesday afternoon for somebody like Bill Russell. We're going to go ahead and play some highlights of him. We'll just leave him in the background. I want to ask you probably my favorite question in this podcast, and that is, which player today most resembles what we're watching on the screen right now? Is there anybody? Is it a mixture of multiple players? Who's Bill Russell today?
I'm going to say Mutombo. But he wasn't nearly as good or effective, but he played the same type of game. It was all defensively. He was able to block shots. He was also a great rebounder. And that was what Russell did. By the way, you're showing clips here, and it's just something I didn't mention. Watch his ability to get a fast break on a rebound. He gets rid of the ball. Les Unseld used to get credit for that. But he gets rid of the ball as quickly as anybody. His offensive moves, as you just saw, were awkward. But he got it done offensively. But he just, like I said, just a great, just a tremendous player.
Yeah, a winner, bottom line. So, okay, before we get to his post basketball career, do you have a favorite memory? I know you talked a lot about the '69 championship and what that meant. Is there an individual play or something that stuck out that you got to see that really impacted you and your memory of Bill Russell?
2 things. Growing up, it seemed like every Sunday the NBA was only on Sunday on TV. And it's not like today we didn't have Boston games no matter where you lived. I lived in the New Jersey area. But what you would get on Sundays was Boston and Philly with Will. It was in the 60s. It seemed like every Sunday. It wasn't, obviously, but it seemed back then they played 8, 9 times a year, the teams. They would play, and it would just be fun to watch the 2 of them go at it. And they were great games. I remember that well. The thing I do remember, and I think I mentioned to you, in '69, Russell was old, and he had been hurt and out for about a week. He was, I think they went into the hospital. But anyway, he came back on a Sunday in a game on TV against Philadelphia. Philadelphia didn't have Wilt then. Boston was a struggling team, 4th place. They came in that year in the regular season. Russell came out, and played the game first in a couple of weeks, didn't play real well. But with about a minute left, it was either Archie Clark or Wally Jones had a layup. Russell was trailing in full speed and came at it, and it was a 1-point game. He made a block, left-handed block. Clark was on the right side, blocked it. Boston got it, scored, won the game off of that block. And it was like, in my mind, I'm saying, oh my God, this guy, he's old, he's hurt all the time. It's near the end. And he comes out of nowhere and does that. He's still got something left. And then little did I know, they went on and won that playoff series which was the last, his last hurrah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough, right, for a player to know when it's time to call it quits, and to be able to do it at the top of the mountain like Bill Russell did, I think is pretty incredible. Not just as a champion, but as the player coach. I mean, it's unbelievable. All right, let's finish with this then. It was a different era, right? And there was a lot going on, just like there is today. And you know what? And before, and forgive me for kind of bouncing around here, but one of the things I got to call out in that video we just showed was that clean block from behind. I don't know who it was who was going up for a layup, but he thought he had all the time in the world, and it was a classic kind of LeBron-esque block from behind. Which, and again, this goes back to what I said before, right? The whole thing about plumbers, and I mean, that's garbage. I mean, these guys were absolute studs, and you've got to watch some of the highlights of those games to really appreciate what they did. So that being said, tell me about his life after the NBA. I think it would have been, from what I gather from Bill Russell, he wasn't necessarily, a guy who loved the spotlight. I would have thought, you retire and you just go and get a nice little place in your hometown, maybe do a little fishing and chill, but that's not the approach he took.
First of all, he in 1961, he was still playing. The team went to Lexington, Kentucky for a preseason game. And he found out, I think, two of the Celtics, Sanders and maybe Sam Jones, I'm not sure, but weren't being served in the motel.
Wow.
Because they were black. And what did Russell do? He told Auerbach what went on there, and they flew home. They didn't play, all the black players. Told you where he stood and what he believed in. Now, he played in Boston, and this is wild. Now, if you watch a game with Boston, they're packed, people screaming. Back then, they were only averaging 8,000, 9,000 people at a game. And don't forget, he was part of the first black starting team ever in the NBA. So in Boston, which never had a great racial reputation, there was a lot of backlash. So he played through that career. He did coach Seattle for a couple of years and Sacramento. But more importantly, he got involved heavily in the civil rights. He was at Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream speech. In fact, he was invited to be backstage but he did not. He refused. It was King's Day. I think he stayed in the crowd. But more importantly, Muhammad Ali, in late 67, Muhammad Ali was wouldn't go to Vietnam, and because he said he was not going to kill no Vietnamese. But anyway, what happened was there was in Cleveland there was a summit. He, a young Kareem Jabbar or Lou Alcindor at the time, Jim Brown, and himself backed Ali in this. And that was a famous thing that went on. So Russell was heavily involved in the whole racial thing for many years. And by the way, when Boston tried to retire his number, he wouldn't show up. He finally showed up, 50 years after, but they retired it without him there because he felt he only played for his teammates. So Russell, he also received the Presidential Medal of Honor from President Obama a couple of years ago. So Russell had this career where he was also a civil rights person. He was outspoken about it. The other piece that's very interesting, when the kneeling, the black athletes kneeling, Russell did a tweet with him kneeling, saying, "I take a knee for those athletes." So he was supportive right to the end of his life and was heavily involved in that. There's a picture of those, the athletes and all. And if you notice, Russell's down at the bottom next to Ali. So, it tells you a little bit. And there they are with Ali. And it's ironic. Ali was 6'2" or 6'3". Look how much bigger the two of them, Jabbar and Russell, are over him. So, but again, Russell was right in the middle of that. There's so many stories that illustrate that whole thing. So not only was he a great basketball player, but he also lived a great life.
Yeah. I can't think of a better way to really end that. I mean, this is incredibly powerful. It's one thing to be great at what you do. It's another thing altogether to take the celebrity that you get from being great and do something good with that. And it's a personal decision. You could argue whether celebrities today should or shouldn't, whatever. But Bill Russell did, and I think he left an incredible impact, not just in the NBA, but across the board. Here we are. We're talking about games played in the 1960s. It's 2024, and we're still talking about Bill Russell. We're never going to stop.
One more thing for the arts. He hosted Saturday Night Live in the late 70s.
You said
so
that,
it just rounds him out in so many ways, which I had to mention. And he did a little bit of acting. When he retired from the NBA, he did a little bit of acting. But I believe he said something like he didn't get a lot of work. He said there's not many roles for a 6'9" black guy. So, and I guess he was right. He gave that up. But he was in a few TV shows and different things back then.
That's awesome. If I can find that link, I will make sure to link it below, because I can't think of a better way to spend 30 minutes or an hour watching SNL with Bill Russell. That'd be kind of interesting. All right, man. Well, that's it. Very, very incredible, fascinating. This is such a fun show. I hope you enjoyed learning more about Bill Russell. If you have someone you want to talk about, you want to hear Steve's thoughts on, please let us know. If we don't hear from you, we're going to pick somebody. Rattled off the folks that we have already talked about: Sam Jones, Rick Barry, Pistol Pete, and of course Will Chamberlain, and now Bill Russell. We'll be back next week to discuss someone else. Make sure to like, subscribe. That stuff matters to us, and we're grateful for it. You can find all the past episodes on thepeachbasket.net, and make sure to add us so that you don't miss any moving forward. Appreciate the time, Steve, and look forward to next week. Thank you.
Thank you.